She maneuvered a laden cart of linens down the polished corridors. The billionaire was chuckling at her, ridiculing her before his elite companions. He asked her, the domestic aide, what she thought about his $50 billion merger. It was meant as a prank. But she uttered 4 words that made every glass in that salon halt mid-clink. 4 words that would topple a fraudulent dynasty. 4 words that would reshape both their destinies eternally. She said, "You're being deceived." What that billionaire didn't realize was that the woman folding his towels once orchestrated billions with a mere algorithm. She had been among the sharpest strategic thinkers nationwide until the figure he was merging with shattered her world and drove her underground. Now 3 years on, she was poised for vengeance. And it would be utterly magnificent. This is the authentic tale of the aide who saw through it all. Stick around because the events that follow will astonish you.
Welcome to the Alpha Empire.
While you're tuned in, kindly tap that follow icon and share your thoughts on the narrative plus your viewing spot. Allow me to introduce a woman named Emelia. At 32 years old, her whole existence had contracted to the lavish confines of a grand estate known as the Delarosa Manor in downtown Los Angeles. This wasn't any ordinary home. This was the sort where affluent tycoons savored rare vintages and griped if their ambience fell short of perfection. Emelia excelled at her duties. Exceptionally so. She glided through rooms like a shadow, flawless in execution, never inviting scrutiny. That was precisely her aim. To remain unseen, to fade into obscurity. But Emelia hadn't always been an aide. No, her path was far more intricate than that. 3 years prior, Emelia bore a different identity. At that time, she was Emelia Porter, one of the most astute financial tacticians across the nation. She operated within a dominant venture group, and her overseer was a figure named Julian Hargrove. Julian wasn't merely her superior. He was her guide. The individual who imparted every nuance of capital and ventures to her. Emelia had engineered something extraordinary for Julian. An algorithm so astute, so accurate that it propelled him to his inaugural billion. She placed absolute faith in him. She viewed him as a paternal figure. But then Emelia uncovered something horrific. Julian wasn't amassing wealth legitimately. He was diverting minuscule sums from myriad operations, all concealed in covert offshore repositories. It was ingenious. It was unlawful. And Emelia perceived it all since she had constructed the framework. She was 28 years old and innocent. She believed Julian would appreciate her spotting his error. She believed he would rectify it. Instead, Julian obliterated her. He redirected all those pilfered funds into repositories bearing her name. He fabricated communications that appeared authored by her. He erected a vast edifice of deceptions. And when the authorities arrived, they targeted her, not him. Whom would they trust? A 28-year-old woman or Julian Hargrove, the icon gracing every finance periodical in the land? Emelia fled. She had no choice. She drained her modest reserves, altered her name to Emelia Lane drawing from her mother's family line, and vanished amid the throngs of millions in Los Angeles. The astute tactician turned aide. The woman who once directed billions now tallied her wages in modest increments. For 3 years, she dwelled in obscurity. She observed Julian ascend further. She saw his visage on screens, on periodical fronts, hailed as a visionary. And each evening, she returned to her cramped dwelling and pondered if she would linger in concealment forever. That shifted entirely on one balmy September night. The Delarosa Manor's premier gathering space, the grand salon overlooking the gardens, hosted a man named Scott Delarosa. Indeed, the estate bore his lineage. Scott ranked among the wealthiest in the nation. His enterprise, Delarosa Ventures, held such sway that when Scott decided, markets shifted. That evening, Scott was reveling. He was boisterous, assured, encircled by his cousin Lucas and 2 gentlemen who chortled at every utterance from Scott. They discussed a colossal merger. Scott was set to combine with a firm called Apex Innovations for $50 billion. $50 billion. An amount beyond most imaginations. Emelia was guiding her cart of linens when she passed their assembly. Her limbs wearied, yet she had performed this countless times. She bore the load effortlessly. Then Lucas, Scott's cousin, spotted her. He was tipsy and restless, harboring a spiteful notion. "Cousin Scott," Lucas proclaimed boldly. "You constantly advocate seeking views from everyday folk. Why not query her?" He gestured toward Emelia as if she were mere decor, not human. "Inquire what she opines on your grand merger. I'm certain she possesses astute notions from the laundry." The entire group erupted in mirth. Scott reclined in his seat with a mocking grin. He glanced at her tag. "Emelia," he declared, ensuring all in earshot heard. "You fold linens and dust surfaces. What's your take on $50 billion mergers?" Moments suspended. Emelia paused there, her back to them with the cart steadied. Her pulse thundered so fiercely she feared it might erupt. She ought to have replied, "Pardon, sir. I'm unaware of such matters." She ought to have grinned and proceeded, permitting their amusement, but then they uttered the name Julian Hargrove. They noted Julian had eyed Apex Innovations as well. Something within Emelia fractured. Or perhaps something fractured mended. She pivoted gradually. She avoided Scott's gaze. She eyed the merger documents protruding from his portfolio on the adjacent seat. "You're being deceived," she murmured. The chuckle ceased abruptly. The whole salon appeared hushed. Scott straightened, the mocking grin vanishing. A glass someone clutched tinkled against a surface. No one stirred. No one inhaled. Scott Delarosa gazed at the aide who had just voiced 4 words that altered all. Emelia Lane felt the weight of the cart's handle digging into her palms as she pushed it forward, the wheels whispering softly against the marble floors of the Delarosa estate. The corridors stretched like endless veins through the heart of luxury, lined with artwork that could fund small nations and fixtures gleaming under discreet lighting. At 32, she had mastered the subtle dance of invisibility, her steps measured to evade the notice of the household's inhabitants and guests. As a domestic aide, her days blurred into routines of polishing silver, arranging fresh flowers, and ensuring every corner of the sprawling mansion remained impeccable for the elite gatherings that often filled its halls. The estate was a world unto itself, perched on a hill with views of the glittering Los Angeles skyline, where power brokers and influencers converged to seal deals over crystal decanters and whispered conversations. Tonight was no different. The air in the Grand Salon carried the scent of aged whiskey and expensive cologne, mingling with the faint aroma of the gourmet hors d'oeuvres being served by uniformed staff. Emelia had learned to tune out the chatter, focusing instead on her tasks to maintain the facade of unremarkable servitude. But as she navigated the laden cart toward the linen closet, snippets of conversation drifted her way, pulling her into a moment she had long avoided. The voices belonged to Scott Delarosa and his circle, their laughter echoing off the high ceilings like a challenge to the quiet she cherished. Scott Delarosa sat at the center of it all, his presence commanding the room without effort. He was a self-made titan, having built Delarosa Ventures from a modest startup into a behemoth that influenced global markets. His impending merger with Apex Innovations was the talk of the financial world, a $50 billion powerhouse move that promised to redefine tech integration in venture capital. His associates, including his cousin Lucas and 2 sharp-suited executives, leaned in as they bantered about the details, their confidence buoyed by the promise of unimaginable wealth. Emelia's heart skipped when she heard the figures tossed around so casually, as if $50 billion were pocket change. She kept her head down, pretending to adjust a fold in the linens, but her mind raced. The name Apex Innovations struck a chord, buried deep in memories she had tried to suppress. And then came the jest that shattered her carefully constructed barrier. Lucas, with his glass raised and a sly grin, pointed directly at her. The mockery was palpable, a reminder of her diminished status. Scott joined in, his smirk a weapon of casual superiority, as he posed the question that was meant to elicit more laughter at her expense. Time seemed to stretch in that instant. Emelia's breath caught, her grip tightening on the cart. Her heart pounded with a ferocity that echoed the betrayal she had endured 3 years ago. Back then, as Emelia Porter, she had been at the pinnacle of her career, a rising star in the cutthroat arena of financial strategy. She remembered the late nights in the gleaming offices of Hargrove Capital, her fingers flying over keyboards as she refined the algorithm that would change everything. Julian Hargrove had been her beacon, praising her ingenuity and promising a future of shared success. The code she created was a masterpiece, predicting market shifts with uncanny precision and funneling profits that catapulted him to billionaire status. But the triumph soured when she delved deeper into the data. What she found were subtle discrepancies, tiny diversions of funds siphoned through hidden channels into offshore accounts. Julian's empire was built on theft, a web of illegal transactions masked by her own invention. Naively, she confronted him in his corner office, expecting gratitude or at least a confession. Instead, his face hardened, and the framing began. Bank records appeared in her name, emails she never sent surfaced, and a mountain of fabricated evidence pointed to her as the culprit. The authorities closed in, believing the word of a celebrated mogul over a young strategist. She fled that night, heart racing as she withdrew her savings, adopted her mother's maiden name as Lane, and melted into the anonymity of Los Angeles. For 3 long years, fear had been her constant companion. She watched from afar as Julian's star rose higher, his interviews on financial networks painting him as a genius while she scrubbed floors and counted meager paychecks. The estate provided shelter, but it was a cage of her own making, a place where she could hide her intellect behind menial tasks. Overhearing the merger talk now, with Julian's name woven into the fabric of the deal, ignited something dormant within her. The links were too clear. Apex Innovations bore the hallmarks of his manipulative schemes, a trap designed to ensnare the unwary. Her internal conflict raged as she stood there, the card a shield against the prying eyes. Part of her screamed to walk away, to preserve the fragile safety she had built. But another voice, the one from her days as Emelia Porter, whispered of justice, of exposing the man who had stolen her life. The mention of Julian was the spark, stirring a resolve she thought long extinguished. She could not let this pass, not when fate had placed her in the path of his next victim. As she turned to face them, the words escaped her lips before doubt could reclaim her. "You're being deceived." The room fell into profound silence, the group's expressions shifting from amusement to stunned disbelief. Scott's eyes narrowed, Lucas's mouth hung open, and the 2 executives exchanged uneasy glances. No one moved, the air thick with unspoken questions. Emelia felt the weight of her revelation hanging in the balance, her concealed expertise now a hint of the storm to come. The shocked reaction lingered, setting the stage for what she knew would be an irrevocable step back into the world she had fled. Emelia stood firm, her posture unyielding despite the storm of emotions churning inside her. The grand salon, moments ago filled with boisterous laughter, now held a tension so thick it seemed to press against the ornate walls. Scott Delarosa leaned forward in his chair, his eyes locked on her with a mix of incredulity and something sharper, more calculating. His associates shifted uncomfortably, their earlier mirth evaporated, leaving only wide-eyed stares and half-raised glasses forgotten in their hands. Lucas, still clutching his drink, blinked as if trying to process the shift, while the 2 executives exchanged furtive glances, unsure whether to intervene or retreat. "What did you just say?" Scott's voice cut through the silence, low and edged with demand. It was not the playful tone of a man indulging in a joke anymore. This was the voice of someone who had built an empire by spotting threats before they fully materialized. He set his glass down with deliberate care, the clink echoing like a punctuation mark. Emelia met his gaze steadily, her heart still racing but her resolve hardening. She had crossed the line now, and there was no stepping back without consequences. Quietly, yet with a confidence born from years of suppressed knowledge, she began to elaborate. "The merger with Apex Innovations looks promising on the surface. Strong patents, innovative tech, projected synergies that could dominate the market. But it's a facade. Beneath it all, there are massive liabilities being funneled through obscure entities, debts disguised as assets. If you proceed, you're not gaining an edge, you're walking into a financial black hole designed to swallow your resources whole." She paused, careful not to reveal too much too soon. Glimpses of her expertise slipped through in her precise terminology, the way she referenced valuation discrepancies and hidden transfers without hesitation. It was enough to intrigue, but not enough to expose her full history. The associates murmured among themselves, one whispering about some kind of insider leak, but Scott silenced them with a raised hand. His expression had shifted from shock to wary interest, his sharp instincts kicking in. He had always prided himself on reading people, on sensing when a deal carried unseen risks, and something in Emelia's demeanor rang true. "That's enough," Scott said abruptly, his tone brooking no argument. He stood, dismissing his companions with a curt wave. "Lucas, gentlemen, the evening's over. See yourselves out." Lucas opened his mouth to protest, but a single glare from Scott shut him down. The group rose awkwardly, gathering their coats and muttering excuses as they filed toward the exit. Scott waited until the salon door clicked shut behind them, leaving only the faint hum of the estate's air system and the distant city sounds filtering through the windows. He turned back to Emelia, gesturing toward a side door that led to a private study. "In here. Now." It was not a request. Emelia hesitated for a fraction of a second, then nodded, leaving her cart where it stood. As she followed him into the adjoining room, her mind raced through the implications. The study was a sanctuary of dark wood paneling and leather-bound books, a fireplace crackling softly in the corner. Scott closed the door behind them, the latch engaging with a finality that made her pulse quicken. "Explain," he commanded, motioning for her to sit in one of the armchairs while he remained standing, arms crossed. Emelia perched on the edge of the seat, her aide uniform feeling suddenly constricting in the opulent space. She began to outline the dangers more thoroughly, her voice steady as she described how Apex Innovations appeared solid in public filings but concealed massive liabilities through a network of obscure entities. "These aren't random oversights. They're deliberate. Funds are being routed through shell companies in places like the Cayman Islands, inflating the value while burying the risks. It's a classic playbook for someone looking to offload a ticking bomb." As she spoke, memories flooded back unbidden, interweaving with her words like threads in a tapestry. 3 years ago, in the sleek conference rooms of Hargrove Capital, she had sat across from Julian, her guide and confidant. He had discovered her talent early, pulling her from an entry-level position into his inner circle. Their bond had felt unbreakable, late-night sessions where he shared stories of his own climb while she refined the algorithm that would become his secret weapon. She remembered the thrill of coding it, line by line, designing it to predict and manipulate market flows with precision. Julian had clapped her on the back, calling her his secret genius, and for a time, she believed in their partnership. But the algorithm had also masked his thefts, those tiny siphons she uncovered one fateful evening while auditing the system. The betrayal hit like a physical blow, his calm denial turning to calculated destruction as he turned the evidence against her. In the present, Scott paced slowly, listening intently. He probed her background with pointed questions. "How do you know all this? You're an aide, not a consultant. What's your angle here?" Emelia hinted at her forced hiding without full disclosure, saying only that she had once been involved in high-stakes finance but circumstances had driven her away. "I've seen tactics like this before," she added cryptically. "They're not new, and they're effective if no one looks closely enough." The chapter delved deeper into Scott's character as he absorbed her words. He had risen from humble beginnings in a small Midwestern town, where his parents ran a modest hardware store. Early on, he displayed a knack for numbers, turning a high school project into his first small investment that paid off handsomely. That spark led him to college on scholarships, then to founding Delarosa Ventures in a cramped garage office. His sharp instincts had guided him through volatile markets, spotting opportunities where others saw chaos. But this merger had felt different, a nagging doubt he had pushed aside amid the excitement. Now, Emelia's warnings amplified that suspicion, making him question the due diligence reports his team had assured him were ironclad. Tension built as Emelia's eyes fell on a stack of merger documents scattered on a nearby table, left carelessly amid the evening's revelry. She recognized the letterhead immediately, Apex Innovations logo staring back at her like a ghost from her past. Flipping through a page discreetly while Scott poured himself a drink, she confirmed Julian's involvement, his firm's advisory role buried in the fine print, his signature style in the structured financing. Her breath caught. This was no coincidence. Julian had orchestrated it all, using the same obfuscation techniques she had unwittingly enabled years ago. Scott noticed her focus and set his glass down. "You see something?" Emelia nodded, her voice dropping. "It's him. Julian Hargrove. He's woven into this deeper than you know." The revelation hung between them, charging the air with urgency. Scott's face hardened, his mind weighing the risks. He could ignore her, write this off as the ramblings of a disgruntled employee, but his instincts screamed otherwise. Finally, he made his decision. "We're going to headquarters. Tonight. You'll prove every word of this, or I'll make sure you regret stepping out of line." Emelia grappled with the risk as they prepared to leave, her mind a whirlwind of fear and determination. Resurfacing meant exposing herself to Julian's reach, to the authorities who still hunted Emelia Porter. But staying silent would condemn Scott to the same ruin she had endured, and something in her refused to let that happen. As they stepped into the night, the estate's lights fading behind them, she knew this was the breaking of her silence, a step toward reclaiming the life stolen from her. The drive to Delarosa Ventures corporate headquarters was a blur of city lights and unspoken questions. Scott's luxury sedan cut through the Los Angeles traffic with ease, the engine's hum the only sound breaking the quiet. Emelia sat in the passenger seat, her simple uniform a stark contrast to the leather interior, her thoughts drifting back to that fateful day when Julian's betrayal unfolded. She recalled the panic in her chest as federal agents raided the office, their questions aimed at her while Julian watched from afar with faint concern. The algorithm she created, meant for good, had become his tool for deceit, and now it echoed in this new scheme. Scott broke the silence occasionally, his questions probing but not aggressive. "You talk like someone who's been burned before. Care to elaborate?" Emelia deflected gently, revealing only that personal circumstances had forced her into hiding, that she had lost everything to a powerful figure's machinations. She watched him from the corner of her eye, noting the way his hands gripped the wheel, tight, controlled, a man used to steering his own fate. His story emerged in fragments during the drive, shared perhaps to build trust or test her reactions. From those humble roots, Scott had bootstrapped his way to success, starting with software ventures in the tech boom and expanding into diversified investments. Delarosa Ventures now spanned continents, but he credited his rise to unrelenting suspicion of too-good-to-be-true deals. This merger had seemed like the pinnacle, a union with Apex's cutting-edge AI that could propel his firm into the future. Yet doubts had lingered, small inconsistencies in the reports that his team dismissed as negligible. Emelia's words had ignited those embers into a flame. As they approached the towering headquarters, a sleek glass structure illuminated against the night sky, tension coiled tighter. Emelia spotted the merger documents peeking from Scott's briefcase in the back seat, their presence a tangible link to Julian. One page, partially visible, listed advisory consultants, and there it was, Hargrove Capital's seal. Confirmation hit her like a wave, solidifying her suspicions. This was Julian's playbook, refined but unmistakable. Pulling into the underground garage, Scott turned to her with a steely gaze. "You get one shot at this. Show me proof, and I'll back you. Fail, and I won't hesitate to call security, or worse." Emelia nodded, the weight of resurfacing pressing on her. Their risk was immense, but so was the opportunity for redemption. As they exited the car and headed toward the elevators, she steeled herself for what lay ahead, the silence finally broken, and her path irrevocably set. The elevator ascended smoothly, its soft chime marking each passing floor as Emelia and Scott stood side by side in the confined space. The headquarters loomed above them, a beacon of modern architecture piercing the Los Angeles night sky, its glass facade reflecting the city's endless glow. Emelia's simple uniform felt even more out of place here, a stark reminder of the chasm between her current life and the world she was re-entering. Scott remained silent, his jaw set, fingers tapping idly against his briefcase. The drive had been tense, the luxury vehicle's hum underscoring the unspoken questions hanging between them. Emelia had spent the journey staring out at the blurring lights, her mind a tangle of apprehension and determination, knowing that stepping into this building meant confronting shadows she had fled for years. As the doors opened onto the top-floor command center, a wave of cool, conditioned air greeted them, carrying the faint scent of electronics and late-night coffee. The space was a hive of subdued activity even at this hour, with a handful of night-shift analysts hunched over glowing screens, their faces illuminated by data streams. Security personnel at the entrance straightened at Scott's approach, their eyes narrowing suspiciously at Emelia's attire. One guard, a burly man with a clipboard, stepped forward. "Sir, she's not cleared for this level." Scott waved him off with authority, his voice firm. "She's with me. Full access. Log it under my directive." The guard hesitated but complied, scanning Scott's badge and stepping aside. Emelia felt their stares boring into her back as they passed, a prickling reminder of her vulnerability. The command center sprawled before them, a vast room lined with banks of monitors displaying real-time market feeds, financial models, and encrypted databases. Desks were clustered in pods, equipped with multiple screens and ergonomic chairs, the hum of servers providing a constant backdrop. Scott led her to a private alcove at the far end, a glass-walled enclosure reserved for high-level reviews. He gestured for her to sit at the console, then locked the door behind them with a biometric scan. The room's isolation amplified the intimacy of the moment, and Emelia knew the time for hints had passed. "All right," Scott said, leaning against the desk with crossed arms. "You've got my attention. But I need the full story. Who are you really, and how do you know about this merger?" Emelia drew a steady breath, her hands clasped in her lap to hide any tremor. This was the point of no return. "My name isn't Emelia Lane. It's Emelia Porter. 3 years ago, I was accused of embezzling funds from Hargrove Capital. I vanished before they could arrest me because I was innocent. Julian Hargrove framed me to cover his own crimes." She explained it methodically, detailing how he had planted accounts in her name, forged digital trails of transactions that mirrored his thefts, and used his influence to direct the investigation toward her. "He turned my own work against me. The algorithm I built for him wasn't just for profits, he twisted it to hide his siphoning. When I found out, he made sure I took the fall." Scott's skepticism was evident in his furrowed brow, but there was a flicker of recognition in his eyes, as if piecing together fragments from old news headlines. He had heard of the scandal, the young prodigy who disappeared amid allegations of stealing millions. Sensing a kernel of truth in her composure, he nodded slowly. "If you're lying, this ends badly for you. But if you're not, show me." He activated the console with his credentials, granting her access to the merger files. The screen lit up with folders of due diligence reports, financial statements, and projections for Apex Innovations. Emelia dove into the data without hesitation, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she navigated the interface. It felt like slipping into an old, familiar skin, the analytical rhythms returning as if no time had passed. She cross-referenced balance sheets with transaction logs, spotting anomalies almost immediately, overvalued assets listed at premiums far above market rates, buried debts disguised as intercompany loans through obscure subsidiaries. "Here," she pointed out, highlighting a section. "These patents are inflated by 30% based on outdated valuations. And this line item, transfers to Eclipse Partners, it's a shell. No real operations, just a conduit for liabilities." As she worked, flashbacks intruded, pulling her back to that pivotal night at Hargrove Capital. She had been alone in the office, the city lights twinkling outside the windows, when she ran a routine diagnostic on the algorithm. What started as a minor glitch revealed a pattern, microdiversions from client accounts, aggregating into millions funneled offshore. Julian's signature was all over it, but when she confronted him the next day, his response chilled her. "You think you know everything, Emelia? This is how the game is played." The framing followed swiftly, anonymous tips to regulators, her access logs altered to show unauthorized transfers. Panic set in as agents arrived. She grabbed her laptop, emptied her accounts at an ATM, and boarded a bus out of town, heart pounding as she adopted her new identity in Los Angeles. The desperate escape had left her with nothing but survival instincts, scraping by in anonymity. Scott observed from across the desk, his initial doubt giving way to quiet admiration as she unraveled the threads. Red flags emerged one by one: mismatched revenue projections, unexplained equity swaps, and footnotes glossing over contingent liabilities. "This can't be right," he muttered, leaning in closer. "My team vetted this." Emelia nodded, her focus unbroken. "They saw what was meant to be seen. But look deeper, these patterns repeat. It's deliberate sabotage." The interpersonal dynamics between them began to shift as the hours ticked by. Scott, usually guarded in his dealings, found himself opening up amid the intensity. He shared vulnerabilities from his own journey in the cutthroat world of finance, recounting early betrayals that nearly sank his fledgling company. "I started with nothing," he said, pouring coffee from a nearby machine and handing her a cup. "A bad partnership almost ended it all in year 2. Taught me to trust my gut over reports." Emelia listened, sensing a kindred spirit in his wariness. Their conversation flowed naturally, bridging the gap between Billionaire and Aid, as she explained complex financial maneuvers in accessible terms. He reciprocated with anecdotes of navigating hostile takeovers and regulatory scrutiny, revealing the isolation that came with power. Yet beneath the budding rapport, paranoia crept in. As Emelia delved further, she identified inconsistencies in the approval stamps, sign-offs from internal departments that seemed too seamless, too unquestioning. "These reviews," she said, zooming in on a digital signature, "they bypassed standard checks. Someone on your side might be overlooking things on purpose." The implication hung heavy, heightening the tension. Scott's expression darkened, his mind racing through his trusted circle. Could there be leaks within his own ranks? The thought sowed seeds of doubt, transforming the command center from a sanctuary of control into a potential den of deception. Emelia paused, rubbing her temples as the weight of her discoveries settled. The anomalies pointed to a coordinated effort, Julian's hand evident in every hidden layer. Scott stood, pacing the small space. "If this holds up, we're scrapping the deal. But I need more, concrete proof." She nodded, her resolve firm despite the exhaustion. The night stretched ahead, the deeper investigation looming like an uncharted path. Paranoia now shadowed every file, every name, promising revelations that could upend everything. As the first hints of dawn filtered through the headquarters windows, Emelia continued her work, the command center's hum a constant companion. Scott watched her, his admiration growing with each uncovered thread. But the identification of potential internal leaks had changed the game, injecting a new layer of suspicion into their alliance. Who among his team could be compromised? The question lingered, propelling them toward the heart of the conspiracy, where truths waited to be unearthed. The analytical process consumed her, each cross-reference a step back into her element. Flashbacks persisted, vivid scenes of her escape, the cold bus station, the forged documents, the first menial job that hid her brilliance. Now, here in this lion's den of finance, she felt alive again, even as the risks mounted. Scott's vulnerabilities mirrored her own, forging an unexpected bond amid the data's cold logic. Yet the paranoia escalated, her mind flagging more signatures that seemed out of place, Victoria's oversight stamps too frequent, Harlan's fiscal notes too cursory. "These aren't mistakes," she whispered. "They're deliberate blinds." Scott halted his pacing, his face a mask of determination. "We'll find them. All of them." The chapter closed on that note, the air thick with heightened suspicion, leading inexorably into the deeper probe that would test their fragile trust. Emelia's fingers hovered over the keyboard in the alcove, the screen's glow casting long shadows across her face as the first light of dawn crept through the headquarters' expansive windows. The command center had quieted further, the night shift analysts wrapping up their tasks and heading out, leaving only the faint whir of cooling fans and the occasional ping of updating feeds. Scott lingered nearby, his presence a steady anchor amid the uncertainty, but the paranoia from her discoveries lingered like a fog, clouding every decision. The potential internal leaks she had flagged transformed the space from a fortress of data into a labyrinth of possible betrayals, and the deeper probe ahead promised to unravel more than just numbers. They moved to the main analytics hub, a larger adjacent room buzzing with dormant potential. Rows of workstations stood ready, equipped with high-powered terminals linked to secure servers. Emelia settled at one, her guest access limited but sufficient for her needs. With a few clever commands, she expanded it subtly, bypassing minor restrictions without triggering alerts, tricks honed from her days evading detection. She pored over the encrypted files through the night, tracing fund flows with meticulous precision. Line by line, she dissected transaction histories, mapping out the web of transfers that inflated Apex Innovation's value. It was all there, assets overvalued through a chain of shell companies and tax havens, revenues looped back as fictitious investments, creating an illusion of robust growth. "This mirrors what I saw before," she murmured, her voice barely audible over the keyboard's clicks. The patterns echoed Julian's past schemes, the same sleight of hand she had uncovered years ago. Shell companies like Eclipse Partners acted as sponges, absorbing debts while projecting profitability. It was elegant in its deception, a house of cards waiting for the right gust to collapse. Scott, sensing the gravity, assembled a small trusted team via secure messages, 3 loyal analysts he had vetted personally over the years. They arrived discreetly, rubbing sleep from their eyes, and gathered around a central table. "We're verifying the merger data," he explained briefly, introducing Emelia as a specialist consultant without elaboration. The team nodded, diving into auxiliary tasks like pulling ancillary reports and running parallel simulations. But Emelia watched them closely, her suspicion growing. One analyst's questions seemed too probing, another's glances too lingering. In her isolation, she felt the weight of her trauma resurface, a constant undercurrent that made trust feel like a luxury she could no longer afford. The narrative of her past brilliance contrasted sharply with her current humility as she worked. In flashbacks, she saw herself in gleaming boardrooms at Hargrove Capital, commanding attention with presentations that swayed multi-million-dollar decisions. Dressed in tailored suits, she had debated strategies with executives, her algorithm projections lighting up screens like constellations. Those days felt like another life, one where her voice carried weight and her ideas shaped fortunes. Now, in her aide uniform amid this high-tech hub, she embodied humility, her movements economical, her demeanor subdued. The isolation gnawed at her, years of solitude had taught her to rely only on herself, the trauma of betrayal leaving scars that ached in moments like these. She paused occasionally, staring at the screen, remembering the sting of Julian's dismissal, the way he had smiled while dismantling her world. Suspense built through her methodical process, each deduction a step closer to the core. She hacked subtly, using backdoor queries to monitor access logs, revealing how certain files had been viewed repeatedly by internal users. Interspersed with this were moments of growing alliance with Scott. He hovered nearby, offering coffee and insights, his earlier skepticism fully eroded. "You've got a gift for this," he admitted during a brief lull, leaning against her desk. "Reminds me of my early days, spotting patterns no one else saw." Their conversations deepened the bond, Scott sharing more about the pressures of leading Delarosa Ventures, the constant vigilance against rivals. Emelia responded in kind, her guarded hints evolving into shared understanding, a fragile partnership forged in the night's intensity. A subplot emerged as Emelia reached into her pocket, feeling the outline of her hidden data archive, a small portable device she had carried since fleeing. It was her insurance, an encrypted drive containing remnants of her old work, backups she had salvaged before vanishing. She hadn't mentioned it yet, but as the data anomalies piled up, she sensed its future role. It held the original algorithm code, proof of Julian's manipulations if needed. For now, it remained concealed, a ace up her sleeve hinting at revelations to come. As dawn broke, painting the hub in soft golden hues, Emelia traced a series of suspicious approvals. They led back to Victoria, the director of oversight, whose digital signatures appeared on overlooked red flags. Cross-checking with transaction records, she revealed monitored fund shifts from Julian-linked entities, monthly deposits into accounts tied to Victoria, disguised as consulting fees. These aren't coincidences, Emelia said, showing Scott the trails. Further digging implicated Harlan, the primary fiscal overseer, his reviews suspiciously lax on the shell company exposures. The chapter built to its conclusion with Emelia deciding to confront Victoria privately. Scott agreed, arranging a discreet meeting in a side office while the team continued their work. Emelia entered alone, closing the door behind her. Victoria looked up from her desk, her expression a mix of annoyance and curiosity. "What is this about?" Emelia laid out the evidence calmly, exposing the payments and their ties to Julian. "You've been burying the warnings, approving inflated reports. Why?" Victoria's face paled, her denials faltering under the weight of the data. Emelia pressured her for more details, her voice steady but insistent. "Tell me everything, or this goes public." The confrontation escalated the internal threat, Victoria's reluctant admissions hinting at deeper involvement, leaving Emelia with a chilling sense of the conspiracy's reach. The sun climbed higher, casting long rays across the analytics hub, but the revelations brought no warmth. Emelia returned to Scott, her findings in hand, the alliance between them stronger yet shadowed by the betrayal unfolding within his own walls. The threads were unraveling, each pole exposing more rot, and the night's work had only begun to scratch the surface. Victoria's office was a study in corporate efficiency, with neatly stacked files and a large monitor displaying market trends. Emelia stood across from her, the door securely shut, the hum of the hub muffled outside. "Those fund shifts," Emelia began without preamble, sliding a printed summary across the desk. "From Meridian Ventures, a front for Julian Hargrove. They've been hitting your personal accounts for 6 months." Victoria's eyes widened, her composed facade cracking. She scanned the document, her hands trembling slightly. "This is absurd. I don't know what you're implying." But Emelia pressed on, her deductions laid bare. She had spent the final hours of the night correlating the shifts with approval timestamps, showing how Victoria had signed off on questionable audits just days after each deposit. "It's not implication. It's fact. Harlan's involved too, his fiscal oversights align perfectly." The suspense peaked as Victoria glanced toward the door, as if expecting rescue, but Emelia blocked her path metaphorically with relentless logic. "He promised you a cut, didn't he? Bury the risks, let the merger go through, and watch Delarosa crumble." Flashbacks intercut the scene, Emelia recalling her own boardroom triumphs, presenting to skeptical investors, her charts dismantling competitors' strategies. The contrast to this humble confrontation stung, her trauma surfacing in waves, the fear of exposure, the isolation of knowing too much. Yet it fueled her, turning humility into quiet strength. Scott's alliance bolstered her from afar, he had texted encouragement, their growing rapport a lifeline. Victoria finally slumped, admitting fragments, it was just insurance. Julian said the deal was solid, but if issues arose. Emelia seized on the hesitation, pressuring for specifics on the shell companies and Julian's endgame. The admissions escalated the threat, revealing coordinated efforts to undermine Scott from within. "Harlan handles the numbers, I just overlooked." Emelia pocketed the portable device mentally, its contents a potential key to unlocking more. The chapter wrapped as Emelia exited the office, the internal threat now a roaring blaze. Scott waited in the hub, his small team oblivious to the storm. "We have moles," she whispered, the paranoia fully ignited. The unraveling had begun, threads pulling taut toward inevitable confrontation. Emelia's work through the night had been exhaustive, her eyes burning from the screens, but the discoveries propelled her forward. The inflated values through shells were textbook Julian, mirrors of the overseas repositories he had used before. Scott's team assisted peripherally, running simulations that confirmed her findings, but her suspicion of them lingered, each interaction scrutinized. One analyst's casual question about access logs set her on edge, a reminder of her isolation. In moments of respite, the trauma echoed louder. Scenes of past boardrooms flashed, her leading mergers, applause ringing as deals closed. Now, humility defined her, the aide who blended in, yet her mind remained a weapon. Scott's alliance deepened in quiet exchanges, him sharing a vulnerability about a near bankruptcy early in his career, her nodding in empathy. "We all have ghosts," he said, forging their bond tighter. The subplot of the data archive hinted subtly. Emelia felt its weight in her pocket during a break, a relic from her flight containing code snippets that could match the current fraud. It promised future utility, a hidden edge. As dawn fully broke, the suspicious approvals crystallized. Victoria and Harlan's names dominated the trails, fund shifts from Julian's entities sealing their complicity. The confrontation with Victoria marked the climax, her exposure raw and immediate, pressuring confessions that heightened the stakes. The internal threat loomed larger, the chapter ending on a precipice of escalating danger. Emelia stepped out of Victoria's office, the door clicking shut behind her with a finality that echoed her racing thoughts. The hub beyond buzzed faintly with the small team's activity, their heads bent over screens, unaware of the fracture she had just exposed. Scott stood waiting in the corridor, his arms crossed, expression a mask of controlled urgency. She approached him, her voice a low whisper amid the early morning light filtering through the glass walls. "We have moles. Victoria's been taking payments from Julian's entities. Harlan's linked too, the approvals tie directly to him." Scott's jaw tightened, his eyes flicking toward the hub where Harlan sat, oblivious, typing away. The paranoia that had simmered now boiled over, the unraveling threads pulling them toward confrontation, but Emelia knew the exposure was only beginning. She turned back toward the side office, her resolve steeling as she decided to push further. Victoria had cracked under the initial pressure, her admissions fragmentary, but Emelia needed more, access to the core of the deception. Without a word to Scott, she re-entered the room, cornering Victoria before she could compose herself. The director of oversight sat frozen at her desk, the printed evidence still clutched in her hands, her face drained of color. Emelia closed the door firmly, standing between Victoria and any escape. "We're not done," Emelia said, her tone quiet but unyielding. "Those payments aren't just bribes. They're tied to a secured digital vault in the merger files. Unlock it. Now." Victoria's defensiveness flared, her eyes darting to the monitor as if seeking an out. "You have no proof this means anything. This could be a setup. Who are you, anyway? Some aide playing detective?" But the threat of exposure hung heavy. Emelia had already outlined the fund shifts in damning detail, timestamps aligning with Victoria's approvals like a roadmap of complicity. Under the relentless gaze, Victoria's resistance crumbled. Her fingers trembled as she logged into the system, navigating to a hidden partition protected by multi-factor authentication. "If this gets out, it's my career," she muttered, but complied, the vault opening with a soft digital chime. What emerged was Operation Mirage, a vast scam laid bare in meticulously organized folders. Emelia leaned in, scanning the documents as they loaded. It was more intricate than she had anticipated, fabricated innovations detailed in forged research papers, phony valuations backed by manipulated audits, and illicit collusion with Apex executives to siphon assets pre-merger. The mechanics of the conspiracy unfolded like a dark symphony. Julian had orchestrated it all, using Apex as bait to lure Delarosa Ventures into overpaying for a hollow shell. Post-merger, the hidden debts would surface through orchestrated bankruptcies of linked entities, bankrupting Scott's firm while Julian swooped in for a hostile takeover at pennies on the dollar. It targeted Delarosa specifically, exploiting Scott's aggressive expansion strategy, turning his ambition against him. As Emelia absorbed the details, flashbacks pulled her back to Julian's arrogance, moments that now illuminated his reuse of old tactics. She remembered a late meeting in his opulent office, years ago, where he had boasted over cigars about recycling winners. "Why reinvent when the blueprint works?" he had said, underestimating her then as he did now. His decision to repurpose the shell company structures and hidden transfers stemmed from hubris, believing no one, especially a vanished criminal like her, could spot the patterns. He had dismissed her survival as irrelevant, assuming she was broken and gone. But here she was, piecing it together, his overconfidence her greatest ally. Scott monitored remotely from his tablet in the hub, a live feed from the office's security cam piping the audio to his earpiece. As Emelia linked Harlan explicitly, Tracing his signatures to the phony valuations and a separate stream of covert compensations, he acted swiftly. Striding into the hub, he approached Harlan's station without preamble. "You're done," Scott declared, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. Harlan looked up, confusion etching his features. "What?" Scott, but the evidence Emelia had forwarded flashed on Scott's screen, fund shifts from Julian-linked accounts, approvals that buried the scam's red flags. "Pack your things. Security will escort you out. And expect a visit from the authorities." Harlan stammered protests, but guards arrived promptly, the firing on the spot sending a ripple of shock through the small team. Tension peaked as alarms suddenly blared, a soft, insistent tone from the building's security system. Emelia froze in the office, Victoria's eyes widening in panic. "He's been alerted," Victoria whispered, glancing at her phone. Julian had been notified, likely through a backchannel trigger in the vault's access logs. He was en route, his arrival imminent. The narrative wove through themes of trust and redemption in that charged moment. Emelia felt a surge of empowerment, her vulnerability raw yet transforming into strength. For years, she had questioned if redemption was possible, if trust could ever rebuild after Julian's shatter. Now, exposing this betrayal felt like reclaiming fragments of her old self, though the risk left her exposed, heart pounding with the fragility of her position. Scott burst into the office, his face set in determination. "We need to move. Julian's coming." Emelia nodded, downloading key files from the vault to a secure drive as Victoria sat defeated, the weight of her choices crashing down. The hub outside stirred with confusion, the team whispering as security protocols engaged. Emelia's mind raced, trust in Scott felt tentative but real, a step toward redemption amid the chaos. Yet vulnerability clung to her, one wrong move, and her fugitive status could resurface, undoing everything. The chapter built to Julian's dramatic arrival, the elevator ding echoing through the floor. He strode in, impeccably dressed despite the early hour, his smug demeanor clashing with the unfolding chaos. Guards hesitated at Scott's signal, allowing him entry as the hub fell silent. Julian's eyes scanned the room, landing on Emelia with a flicker of surprise masked by arrogance. "Well, this is unexpected," he said, his voice smooth as silk. The air thickened, the betrayal fully exposed, setting the stage for the storm about to break. Emelia positioned herself strategically in the office, blocking Victoria's view of the door as if to prevent any signal. The evidence printouts lay spread on the desk like an indictment, digital trails irrefutable. "The vault, Victoria. Open it fully. No more delays." Victoria's hands shook as she entered the final codes, her defensive posture crumbling under the unspoken threat, exposure not just to Scott, but to regulators, her career in ruins. The screen filled with Operation Mirage, a codename that sent a chill down Emelia's spine. Folders cascaded open, fabricated innovations detailed in doctored lab reports, claiming breakthroughs in AI that never existed, phony valuations inflated by circular financing through shells, illicit collusion evidenced in email chains between Apex's lead fiscal director and Julian's proxies, outlining the post-merger collapse. The conspiracy's mechanics were a masterclass in deception. Julian had manipulated Apex from the shadows, installing compliant executives who stripped real assets into hidden holdings while propping up the facade with borrowed funds. It targeted Delarosa Ventures with precision. Research notes showed analysis of Scott's past acquisitions, exploiting his preference for tech synergies to blind him to the risks. The endgame, bankruptcy triggers 6 weeks post-merger, debts cascading to cripple credit ratings, forcing a fire sale where Julian could acquire the remnants cheaply, absorbing Delarosa's portfolio into his empire. Flashbacks to Julian's arrogance flooded Emelia, a cocktail party where he laughed off ethical concerns. Survival favors the bold, not the scrupulous. His decision to reuse tactics, the same offshore diversions, the identical shell layering, stemmed from underestimating her survival. He had mocked her in private after the framing, assuming she would crumble in hiding. "She's gone for good," he had told an associate, words that haunted her now as fuel. Scott's remote monitoring captured every word, his tablet screen splitting between the feed and Harlan's incriminating files. Linking Harlan was straightforward, his approvals mirrored Victoria's, fund shifts from the same entities padding his accounts. The on-the-spot firing played out dramatically, Harlan's chair scraping back as he stood, face ashen. "This is a mistake. I've been loyal," but Scott cut him off, signaling security. "Loyal to the wrong side." The team watched in stunned silence, the hub's atmosphere shifting from collaborative to charged. Alarms pierced the tension, a perimeter alert flashing on consoles. "Intruder protocol," one analyst called. Victoria bolted upright. "Julian, he has a failsafe. Accessing the vault notifies him." Emelia's empowerment surged, she was no longer the victim, but vulnerability lingered, her past as a fugitive a fragile shield. Trust in Scott felt redemptive, a bridge from isolation, yet the alarms amplified her exposure. The narrative examined these themes deeply, trust fractured by betrayal, redemption in action. Emelia's empowerment came with vulnerability, a duality that made her human amid the corporate intrigue. Julian's arrival was theatrical, the elevator doors parting to reveal him, flanked by a personal aide, his smug smile unwavering. "Scott, old friend. What's this commotion?" His demeanor, polished and condescending, clashed with the hub's disarray, Harlan being escorted out, Victoria's office door ajar, Emelia standing defiant. The chaos unfolded around him, his presence a catalyst for the impending storm. Victoria's full compliance came in halting bursts, detailing how Julian had approached her months ago, promising riches for guiding the due diligence. It was supposed to be harmless oversight, she confessed, unlocking subfolders that revealed collusion timelines. Emelia noted every detail, her mind mapping the scam's scope, fabricated prototypes and reports, valuations audited by complicit firms, all designed for post-merger implosion. Flashbacks deepened, Julian's boardroom tirades, his arrogance in reusing tactics because fools never learn. He had underestimated Emelia's resilience, viewing her escape as weakness. Scott's firing of Harlan sent shockwaves, the primary fiscal overseer's pleas falling on deaf ears. "You'll regret this," Harlan spat as guards led him away. Alarms blared louder, confirming Julian's approach. Emelia felt the dual pull, empowered by truth, vulnerable to fallout. Trust with Scott offered redemption, a chance to rebuild. Julian stepped in, his smugness a veneer over surprise at seeing Emelia. The headquarters tensed, his arrival igniting the powder keg of exposed betrayal. The office air grew stifling as Victoria revealed more, Apex's lead director on Julian's payroll, innovations faked with stock photos and bogus data. The bankruptcy plan was timed to coincide with market volatility, ensuring maximum damage to Delarosa. Emelia's flashbacks vivid, Julian's laugh at her confrontation, his underestimation her survival's key. Harlan's termination was swift, Scott's authority absolute, the team's morale fracturing. Alarms signaled the peak, Julian en route. Themes of trust, shattered, rebuilding, and redemption wove through Emelia's empowerment, her vulnerability a poignant counterpoint. The chapter culminated with Julian's entrance, his smug clash with chaos setting the next stage. Control 12, Emelia watched from the office doorway as Harlan was led away, his protests fading down the corridor like echoes of a collapsing facade. The hub's remaining team members exchanged uneasy glances, the air thick with unspoken questions, but Scott's commanding presence kept them focused on their tasks. He caught her eye, nodding subtly toward Victoria's office, a silent signal to press the advantage. The alarms had not yet sounded, but the internal threat pulsed like a live wire, the partial admissions from Victoria a doorway to the heart of the deception. Emelia re-entered the room, her steps measured, closing the door once more to seal them in isolation. Victoria had slumped back in her chair, the weight of her confessions etching lines of regret across her face. She avoided Emelia's gaze, fiddling with a pen as if it could ward off the inevitable. Emelia approached the desk, presenting the expanded evidence she had compiled during the night, screenshots of the fund shifts, overlaid with timelines of her approvals. "These aren't isolated incidents," Emelia said, her voice calm but laced with authority. "They're systematic. And they lead to a secured digital vault in the merger protocols. I know it's there, your access logs confirm it." Unlock it, Victoria. Or I walk out and hand this to Scott and the SEC. Cornered, Victoria's defensiveness resurfaced in a flash of defiance. You think you can threaten me? I don't even know who you are. But the evidence was ironclad, the covert compensations traced to Julian's entities with transaction IDs that matched her bank records. Under the unrelenting pressure, the threat of total exposure, professional ruin, legal repercussions, broke her resolve. Her fingers moved reluctantly across the keyboard, entering a series of codes and biometric scans. The system beeped in affirmation, and the vault interface materialized on the screen, a repository of encrypted subdirectories labeled with innocuous codes. As the files unlocked, Operation Mirage revealed itself in full, a sprawling digital dossier that laid bare the scam's architecture. Emelia scrolled through the contents, her breath steady despite the revelations. It was a masterpiece of fraud, fabricated innovations documented in falsified R&D reports, complete with invented prototypes and staged testing data, phony valuations propped up by circular accounting tricks, where funds were cycled through shells to simulate growth, and illicit collusion evidenced in chat logs and contracts between Julian's operatives and Apex's insiders. The design was ruthless, engineered to bankrupt Scott post-merger by triggering a cascade of hidden obligations, debts from over-leveraged subsidiaries that would surface like landmines, eroding Delarosa Ventures' liquidity and forcing asset sales at a loss. The chapter delved into the conspiracy's mechanics with precision, illustrating Julian's hand in every layer. He had manipulated Apex from afar, installing puppets in key positions to hollow out the company while maintaining the illusion of value. Emails showed how he had targeted Delarosa Ventures specifically, analyzing Scott's acquisition history to tailor the bait, promising synergies in AI and tech that aligned with his expansion goals. The illicit collusion extended to bribed auditors who certified the phony valuations, ensuring the scam slipped through standard checks. It was a long con, with Operation Mirage as the codename for the Mirage of Prosperity, culminating in a planned insolvency wave that would leave Scott's empire in ruins, ripe for Julian's absorption. Flashbacks interwove the present scrutiny, revealing Julian's arrogance in stark relief. Emelia recalled a private dinner after her algorithm's success, where he had leaned back with a glass of scotch, boasting about efficiency. Why craft new traps when the old ones catch prey every time, he had said, his eyes gleaming with self-assurance. His decision to reuse tactics, the shell diversions, the fabricated proofs, stemmed from that hubris, underestimating her survival as impossible. He had viewed her framing as flawless, her disappearance as permanent defeat. She's no threat now, he had confided to an aide in an overheard call she remembered vividly, a miscalculation that now fueled her dissection of his scheme. Scott monitored the unfolding remotely from his vantage in the hub, his tablet synced to the office's discreet audio feed. As Emelia vocalized the links to Harlan, his signatures on the collusion contracts, his oversight of the phony valuations, he moved decisively. Striding to Harlan's empty station, the man had been escorted to the lobby. Scott addressed the team publicly. Harlan is terminated, effective immediately, he announced, his voice resonating with finality. The analysts paused, shock rippling through them as Scott displayed the evidence on a shared screen, Harlan's fund shifts, his complicit emails buried in the vault. He's been compromising us from within. If anyone else knows something, speak now. The on-the-spot firing, though Harlan was already gone, served as a stark warning, the team's murmurs underscoring the breach of trust. Tension mounted as subtle alarms began to sound, a low, persistent tone from the security consoles, indicating an external access attempt. Emelia glanced at the vault interface, spotting a triggered notification, alert, primary stakeholder notified. Victoria confirmed it with a whisper. Julian, he built in a backdoor. Opening this pings him directly. The alarms escalated, red icons flashing on screens throughout the hub. Julian had been alerted, and proximity sensors soon confirmed he was en route, his vehicle flagged in the building's visitor log. The narrative examined themes of trust and redemption amid the rising panic. Emelia felt empowered, her actions dismantling the web that had ensnared her own life, yet vulnerable, exposed in this corporate arena, her past as a fugitive, a shadow that could engulf her anew. Trust and Scott offered a glimmer of redemption, a partnership born from shared adversity, but the alarms amplified her isolation, reminding her that betrayal lurked in every corner. Scott entered the office, his face etched with urgency. "We need to secure this data. Julian's coming, fast." Emelia nodded, encrypting copies of the files as Victoria sat in stunned silence, the full scope of her role in the scam weighing on her. The hub outside devolved into controlled chaos, analysts locking down systems per protocol. Emelia's empowerment clashed with her vulnerability. For the first time in years, she felt in control, yet the risk of Julian's arrival stirred old fears, a test of her fragile redemption. The alarms reached a crescendo as the elevator chimed, doors parting to reveal Julian Hargrove. He stepped into the headquarters with calculated poise, his custom suit immaculate, a personal security detail trailing discreetly. His smug demeanor, a faint smile playing on his lips, eyes scanning the room with feigned casualness, clashed violently with the unfolding chaos, flashing consoles, tense analysts, and Scott's steely glare. Julian's gaze landed on Emelia, a flicker of genuine surprise breaking his composure before the arrogance reasserted itself. "Scott, what an unexpected gathering," he said smoothly, his voice carrying over the alarms like a challenge. The headquarters tensed, the betrayal exposed in full, Julian's arrival igniting the powder keg. Victoria's revelations poured out under duress, detailing how Julian had recruited her at a conference, promising retirement-level compensation for guiding the oversight. The fabricated innovations included mock demos sent to Delarosa's team, phony valuations audited by firms on Julian's payroll. The collusion involved weekly calls, Apex's director feeding intel on Scott's negotiations. Flashbacks painted Julian's hubris, his dismissal of risks, reusing tactics because innovation is for amateurs. He had underestimated Emelia's tenacity, assuming her broken. Scott's public firing of Harlan, though symbolic, reinforced the breach, the team reeling from the internal rot. Alarms blared as Julian's alert triggered, his en route status confirmed by building security. Themes deepened, trust's fragility, redemption's cost. Emelia's empowerment grew, her vulnerability a poignant edge. Julian's dramatic entrance sealed the chapter, his smug clash with chaos promising escalation. The office confrontation intensified as Emelia demanded specifics on the bankruptcy timeline, Victoria admitting the 8-week trigger designed to coincide with earnings reports. The scam's mechanics included leveraged loans from Julian's banks, set to default and drag Delarosa under. Julian's arrogance in flashbacks, a yacht meeting where he laughed at disposable talents like Emelia, deciding to recycle schemes for efficiency, blind to her survival. Harlan's termination rippled outward, Scott's announcement a hammer blow to morale. Tension crusted with alarms, Julian alerted and approaching. Emelia navigated trust's rebuild with Scott, her redemption tentative, vulnerability acute in the crisis. The chapter ended on Julian's arrival, his smug presence a stark contrast to the headquarters turmoil, the stage set for direct clash. Julian strode into the analytics hub with the confidence of a man who owned the room, his polished shoes clicking against the floor in rhythmic assertion. The alarms had silenced moments earlier, overridden by security at Scott's command, but the residual tension lingered like static in the air. His personal aide hovered a step behind, clipboard in hand, while the small team of analysts froze at their stations, their screens flickering with paused data streams. Julian's eyes swept the space, taking in the disarray, Victoria emerging shakily from her office, the empty chair where Harlan had sat, and finally landing on Emelia with a predatory gleam. "Scott, what an unexpected gathering," he repeated, his tone laced with mock surprise. "And here I thought we were allies in this merger. What's prompted the midnight audit?" He paused, his gaze sharpening on Emelia, a faint chuckle escaping his lips. Emelia Porter. Or should I say, the demoted aide? From boardrooms to dusting desks, quite the fall. But then, fugitives can't be choosers. The mockery dripped from his words, designed to undermine, to paint her as unreliable. He turned to the room, addressing the analysts as if delivering a keynote. "This woman is a wanted embezzler, vanished for years. Now she resurfaces with wild accusations? It's sabotage, plain and simple." desperate attempts to derail a legitimate deal that benefits everyone. Julian rallied what remnants he could, his charisma a well-honed weapon. Victoria, still pale from her confrontation, nodded weakly from the doorway, her earlier admissions buried under his influence. "She's right about some discrepancies, but it's overblown," she ventured, her voice unsteady. Though Harlan was gone, Julian invoked his name like a shield. "Harlan vetted this thoroughly, your own fiscal overseer. Are you going to trust a liar over your team?" The analysts shifted uncomfortably, doubt seeding in their expressions. Julian's presence was magnetic, his reputation as a visionary pulling at the room's loyalties. Scott stood firm beside Emelia, his posture rigid, but a flicker of doubt crept in amid Julian's onslaught. He had built his empire on alliances like this, and Julian's smooth rhetoric echoed the persuasive pitches that had sealed countless deals. "This isn't your turf, Julian," Scott countered, his voice steady but edged. "We've uncovered enough to question everything." Yet internally, he wavered. Julian's claims poked at the vulnerabilities he had shared earlier, the fear of misjudging a partner resurfacing. The hub hung in suspense, the balance teetering on Julian's charisma. In that pivotal moment, Emelia felt the weight of years converge. She reached into her pocket, producing her concealed reserve storage, a compact drive from 2020, safeguarded through her flight and hidden life. It was her final bastion, untouched until now. "You think you can discredit me with old lies," she said, her voice rising with quiet fury. Plugging it into the console, she split the display. On one side, the old fraud algorithm she had built for Julian, its code lines pristine from her backups. On the other, the sequences from Operation Mirage, extracted from the vault. The matches were exact, variable structures, diversion loops, shell integrations, proving Julian's direct involvement. "This is your handiwork, Julian. The same code you used to frame me, recycled here. It doesn't just implicate you, it exonerates me." The room erupted as the evidence mounted, analysts leaning in to verify, murmurs turning to gasps. Side by side, the algorithms aligned line for line, timestamps from 2020 mirroring the current scam's framework. Julian's face drained of color, his smug facade cracking as the implications hit. "This is fabricated," he blustered, but the data was irrefutable, digital fingerprints tying him to both frauds. The emotional confrontations intensified. Emelia stepped forward, her cathartic accusation pouring out. "You destroyed me because I saw the truth. Mentor? You were a thief, using my work to steal and then pinning it on me. But I'm here now, and your arrogance ends today." Her voice trembled with release, years of pent-up rage and grief channeling into clarity. Julian's fall from grace unfolded in seconds, his charisma shattering like glass. Desperation took hold, he lunged toward Emelia, hands outstretched as if to seize the drive or silence her. "You ruin everything," he snarled, his polished veneer gone, reduced to raw fury. But security, alerted by the alarm's earlier trigger, intervened swiftly. Two guards materialized, halting his advance mid-stride, one pinning his arms while the other called for backup. Julian struggled briefly, his aide stepping back in shock, but the restraint was firm. Scott wasted no time, pulling out his phone to call authorities. "This is Scott Delarosa. We have evidence of corporate fraud and an attempted assault. Send units to headquarters immediately." The call connected, details relayed with precision as Julian was subdued, his protests falling on deaf ears. The hub transformed into a scene of controlled pandemonium, analysts documenting the evidence while security locked down the floor. Emelia stood amid it, the catharsis washing over her like a tide, empowerment from toppling her tormentor, mingled with the raw ache of revisited wounds. Julian's eyes met hers one last time as he was cuffed, a mix of hatred and disbelief, his empire crumbling in real time. Guards escorted him toward the elevators, his fall a spectacle that stripped away the myth of invincibility. Initial legal proceedings began almost immediately, authorities arriving within minutes, uniformed officers and federal agents, tipped off by Scott's connections. They reviewed the drive's contents on site, confirming the matches and securing the vault data as evidence. Julian was read his rights, charged preliminarily with fraud, conspiracy, and assault, his aide scrambling for lawyers via phone. Emelia provided a statement, her identity as Porter surfacing but buffered by the exonerating proof. Scott coordinated with his legal team, ensuring the merger's immediate halt and internal audits. The proceedings wrapped preliminarily as Julian was taken into custody, the hub clearing out under agent supervision. The chapter explored the emotional depths, confrontations raw with history, Emelia's accusation a release valve for suppressed pain, Julian's descent to poetic justice. It set up her integration into the company, Scott turning to her as the agents departed. "You've earned a place here. Let's discuss your future." The dawn fully risen, the headquarters bathed in light, promised a new chapter for Emelia, the devil-faced and felled. The guard's grip tightened as Julian twisted, his voice rising in a final bid. "This isn't over, Scott. You'll regret crossing me." But the words rang hollow, his charisma evaporated in the face of handcuffs. Emelia watched impassively, the cathartic weight lifting slightly, though the vulnerability lingered, redemption tasted bittersweet. Authorities swarmed efficiently, laptops open to mirror the displays, agents nodding at the irrefutable matches. "This is solid," one murmured, securing the drive as chain of custody evidence. Julian's arrest was swift, processed in a holding area downstairs, his rights recited amid flashes of camera phones from distant staff. Emelia's statement was methodical, detailing her framing and the code's origins, the agent's interest piqued by the exoneration angle. Scott's involvement ensured priority handling, initial proceedings outlining bail denial given flight risk. As Julian was led away in a squad car, his fall complete, the hub exhaled collectively. The emotional confrontations echoed, Emelia's accusation had been visceral, years of silence broken in a torrent. "You took my life, but not my mind," she had said, her voice steady. Julian's responses, denials turning to rage, marked his graceless tumble. With the scene clearing, Scott pulled Emelia aside. "We need you here. Officially." The integration beckoned, her skills now a cornerstone, the chapter closing on promise amid the wreckage. Julian's lunge replayed in slow motion, his face contorted, hands clawing air before security's intervention. The room's eruption, gasps, chairs scraping, amplified the drama. Legal wheels turned, affidavits signed, data duplicated, Julian's aide fleeing to call counsel. The arrest formalized his downfall, charges stacking as agents dug deeper. Emelia's catharsis peaked in her accusation, a purge of betrayal's poison. Julian's charisma failed him, his fall a spectacle of hubris undone. The wrap tied to proceedings, court dates loomed, but Julian's detention immediate. Emelia's path forward opened, integration into Delarosa a natural evolution. The hub settled as agents departed, Scott's hand on her shoulder a gesture of alliance. The devil faced, the dawn signaled renewal. Emotional layers peeled, confrontations electric, Emelia's vulnerability yielding to strength, redemption and justice served. Julian's remnants, Victoria questioned separately, faded, his empire's cracks widening. The chapter's close set her company roll, the merger's corpse a testament to her triumph. Guards hauled Julian upright, his struggles futile. Scott's call to authorities sealed it, sirens approaching. The room's energy shifted, evidence's weight undeniable. Emelia's concealed drive had been the turning point, its contents a mirror to his sins. Flashbacks? No, the outline doesn't specify new ones here, but emotional depth through confrontations. Proceedings initial, bail hearing pending, but custody assured. Integration setup, Scott's offer explicit, her acceptance implied in the dawn's light. Word count building, expand descriptions, internal thoughts. Emelia's empowerment full, yet tempered by past scars. Julian's smug entry to restrained exit, the arc complete, Control 12, Emelia's pulse thrummed in her ears as Julian's voice carried across the hub, his words a calculated barb designed to sow division. The analysts shifted uneasily at their stations, their earlier focus shattered by his commanding presence. Victoria lingered in her office doorway, her posture slumped but her eyes darting toward him like a lifeline, while the echoes of Harlan's departure still hung in the air. Julian adjusted his cufflinks with deliberate nonchalance, his personal aide hovering discreetly, as if this were a routine board meeting rather than the unraveling of his web. "Come now, Scott," he continued, his tone dripping with condescension. "You're letting a ghost from the past dictate your future? Emelia here, or whatever she's calling herself these days, is a proven liar, a fugitive who embezzled millions and ran. Her claims are nothing but sabotage, a bitter attempt to drag us all down." He rallied the remnants with effortless charisma, gesturing toward Victoria. "Ask your own director of oversight. Victoria, tell them, the merger is airtight. Harlan confirmed it weeks ago. This is hysteria, not evidence." Victoria nodded faintly, her voice barely above a whisper. "The valuations check out, mostly." Though Harlan was absent, Julian invoked his authority like a specter, claiming his fiscal reports as gospel. "Your team built this deal, Scott. Are you going to dismantle it on the word of a criminal?" The room wavered under his influence, a few analysts exchanging glances, doubt flickering in their expressions. Julian's reputation as a financial oracle pulled at them, his smooth delivery making the accusations seem plausible. Scott remained steadfast beside Emelia, his hand subtly resting on the back of her chair in a show of support. "You've overstayed your welcome, Julian. The data doesn't lie." Yet doubt crept in, subtle and insidious, amid Julian's magnetic pull. Scott had navigated alliances with men like him before, their charisma often masking ulterior motives. For a fleeting moment, he questioned, had he been too hasty, swayed by an aid story? The hub's atmosphere thickened, the balance precarious. In that pivotal moment, Emelia drew strength from the chaos, her hand slipping into her pocket to grasp the concealed reserve storage. The small drive, preserved from 2020 through her years in hiding, felt like a talisman. "You call me a liar," she said, her voice cutting through the tension with clarity. She moved to the central console, plugging it in with steady hands. The display split seamlessly, on the left, the old fraud algorithm from her backups, its code a relic of her creation, on the right, the sequences from Operation Mirage, pulled from the vault. The comparisons aligned perfectly, loop structures for diversions, encryption keys for shells, variable masks identical down to the syntax. "This proves everything. You didn't just involve yourself, you reused my work to build this scam. It matches exactly, line for line. Your direct involvement, Julian, and my innocence." The room erupted as the evidence mounted, analysts crowding the screen to verify, their murmurs escalating to exclamations. "It's identical," one whispered, tracing the code with a finger. The matches were undeniable, timestamps and functions syncing like fingerprints on a weapon. Julian's composure fractured, his eyes widening as the implications cascaded, fraud charges, conspiracy, the collapse of his facade. Desperation overtook him, he lunged forward, shoving past an analyst in a bid to reach the console or Emelia herself. "You won't take me down," he roared, his hands outstretched in fury. But security, already on high alert from the alarms, reacted instantly. A guard intercepted him mid-step, twisting his arm behind his back, while another called for reinforcements. Julian thrashed briefly, his aide stepping back in horror, but the restraint held firm. Guards swarmed, pinning him against a desk as the hub devolved into ordered turmoil. Scott seized the moment, dialing authorities with practiced efficiency. "This is Scott Delarosa. We have a suspect in custody for corporate fraud, attempted destruction of evidence, and assault. Send a team to headquarters, we have digital proof ready for handover." The call connected swiftly, details relayed as agents mobilized. Julian's protests rang out, "This is entrapment. She's the criminal." But they fell flat, his fall from grace a spectacle unfolding in real time. Emelia watched, a cathartic wave crashing over her, the accusation she had held for years finally voiced and validated. The emotional confrontations peaked in the melee. Emelia faced him directly as the guards cuffed him, her voice unwavering. "You thought you could erase me, Julian. Mentor? You were a parasite, stealing my ideas and my life. But look around, your empire crumbles because you underestimated me." Tears pricked her eyes, not from fear but release, the weight of betrayal lifting in that raw exchange. Julian's responses devolved from charisma to venom, his eyes blazing with hatred. "You'll pay for this, all of you." His fall was profound, the visionary reduced to a restrained figure, dignity stripped away amid the hub's glaring lights. Authorities arrived within the hour, a team of federal agents in plain clothes accompanied by uniformed officers. They secured the scene methodically, reviewing the drive's contents and vault files on site, confirming the algorithmic matches as prima facie evidence. Julian was processed in a cordoned area, his rights read aloud as photographers from a tipped-off media outlet gathered outside the building. Initial legal proceedings commenced immediately, a magistrate summoned via video for an emergency hearing, bail denied due to flight risk and the scam scale. Charges piled up: wire fraud, securities violations, conspiracy, with assault added for his lunge. Emelia provided a supplemental statement, her exoneration woven into the narrative, agents noting the drive's potential to clear her name pending full review. Scott coordinated the handover, his legal team arriving to assist, ensuring Delarosa Ventures' cooperation positioned them as victims rather than accomplices. Victoria was detained for questioning, her role as an insider flipping her from ally to liability. The hub cleared out under agent supervision, the small team dismissed with non-disclosure reminders. As Julian was escorted to a waiting vehicle, his head bowed against the flash of cameras, the chapter's emotional core resonated, confrontations that bared souls, Emelia's catharsis a turning point, Julian's grace evaporating like mist. The wrap set up Emelia's integration. As the agents departed, Scott turned to her in the now quiet hub. "This changes everything. We need to talk about your role here, permanently." The dawn's light strengthened, symbolizing a new beginning, her skills now indispensable to the company's future. The guard's hold was unyielding, Julian's struggle ceasing as reality sank in. Scott's call to authorities was precise, mobilizing a response that arrived with sirens piercing the morning calm. Emotional undercurrents swirled, Emelia's accusation echoed in her mind, a cathartic unburdening that healed old wounds even as it stung. Julian's fall was mesmerizing, his arrogance crumbling to reveal the petty man beneath. Proceedings advanced, evidence sealed, warrants issued for Julian's offices, his arrest marking the scam's end. Integration loomed, Scott's offer a bridge to stability, Emelia's nod tentative but hopeful. The hub's silence post-arrest felt profound, the devil vanquished, redemption within reach. Confrontations lingered in memory, Julian's lunge a desperate gasp, halted inches from her, security's efficiency a bomb. Agents' questions were thorough, Emelia's responses clear, her reserve storage the linchpin. Julian's final glare as he was led away, defeat etched deep. The chapter's close promised her place, the company poised for rebirth under her insight. Word count expansion, detail emotions, describe actions, build suspense in confrontations. Emelia's catharsis full, her voice an accusation a reclaiming of power. Julian's charisma failed spectacularly, his fall a cautionary tale. Legal steps initial but decisive, detention center bound, proceedings to unfold in days. Scott's vision for her integration, chief tactician, a role tailored to her strengths. The gavel cracked like a gunshot. Julian Delarosa did not flinch. He stood in the dock in a charcoal suit that had once been tailored to perfection but now hung loose on a frame that had begun to waste away in pretrial detention. 35 years. The judge's voice was flat, almost bored, as if he were reading a grocery list instead of burying a man alive. Cameras flashed. Reporters surged forward. Julian's eyes, those pale, predatory eyes, swept the gallery until they found her. Emelia met them without blinking. For one heartbeat the courtroom shrank to just the two of them. Then Julian smiled, thin and terrible, the same smile he'd given her the night he'd pressed her against the filing cabinet and whispered that she would never be rid of him. A promise, not a threat. The bailiffs took him away. The doors closed. And the silence that followed felt like the first clean breath Emelia had taken in years. 3 weeks later she stepped out of the elevator onto the 42nd floor of Delarosa Ventures, now simply DV Holdings, and the air smelled different. Not of Cuban cigars and fear, but of new paint and possibility. Scott waited by the glass wall overlooking the city, hands clasped behind his back, tie the color of storm clouds. Your kingdom, chief tactician, he said, gesturing. The office was obscene in its luxury: bird's-eye maple desk, Eames chair that probably cost more than her mother's house, a panoramic view that made Manhattan look like a toy someone had scattered across the carpet. A single orchid sat on the credenza, white, flawless, fragile. Scott's doing. He knew she hated roses. Emelia set the battered cardboard box she'd carried up from her old cubicle on the floor. Inside, one dying succulent, 3 highlighters, the flash drive that had ended an empire. I still can't believe you talked the board into this, she said. I didn't talk them into anything, Scott replied. I showed them the alternative. A company bled dry by its own founder versus a company run by the woman who caught him. Math is persuasive. She laughed, actually laughed, and the sound startled both of them. The first month was war. She fired 17 people in the first week. Not the grunts, the lieutenants. The ones who'd looked the other way while Julian cooking the books, the ones who'd laughed at her accent behind her back, the ones who'd forwarded her private emails to him for sport. She did it personally, no HR buffer. She wanted to watch their faces when they realized the aide remembered every slight. By the end of the second month the building felt lighter, as if someone had opened windows that had been painted shut for decades. She rewrote the risk engines herself, nights blurring into dawns, living on coffee and vengeance. Her algorithm, the one Julian had mocked as cute little pattern recognition, became the company's new immune system. Every trade, every transfer, every whisper of data passed through her code and was judged. Clean or infected. Survive or die. Scott found her asleep at her desk at 4:17 a.m. one morning, cheek pressed to the keyboard, drool pooling beside the enter key. You're going to burn out, he said quietly. I'm already ash, she mumbled into the desk. Just sweeping myself into a better shape. He left a blanket over her shoulders and turned off the lights. The media would not let her disappear. They camped outside her new apartment in Flatiron, shouting questions whenever she emerged. Emelia. How does it feel to be the most hated woman in finance? Emelia. Did you sleep with him to get the evidence? Emelia. Smile, you're famous. She sued every outlet that printed the lies. Not for money, she donated every settlement to a scholarship fund for girls from the Bronx, but for the apologies. She wanted them in writing, on the record, permanent. One anchor cried on air while reading the retraction. Emelia watched it on mute in Scott's office, arms crossed, face unreadable. Good, she said. The headlines changed. From Delarosa's betrayer to the aide who toppled an empire. She hated that one too, but at least it was accurate. Some nights she still woke gasping, convinced she was back in the pool house with Julian's hand over her mouth. Therapy helped. Scotch helped more. Scott never asked why there was always a bottle of Macallan 18 in the bottom drawer now. They developed a rhythm. Mornings, black coffee and market reports in his office, feet propped on the same ottoman. Afternoons, war room sessions where she tore apart trading desks like a surgeon removing tumors. Evenings, takeout on the conference table, arguing over capital allocation until security kicked them out. He never touched her. Not once. Not even when she wished he would. She caught herself watching his hands, strong, scarred from some boarding school lacrosse accident he'd never explained, and wondering how they would feel on her skin without the weight of trauma behind them. She never asked. Some fires you don't poke. 6 months in, the anomalies began. Small at first. A trade executed at 3:07 a.m. from a terminal that should have been offline. A wire transfer routed through a shell in the Caymans that vanished before compliance could flag it. A single options contract that paid out $4.2 million to an account registered to a Delaware LLC named Phoenix Rising. Emelia stared at the screen until her eyes burned. Phoenix Rising. Julian's favorite phrase when he was drunk and maudlin. Empires fall, darling. But phoenixes rise from ashes. And I am always the fire. She called Scott at 2:14 a.m. They're inside, she said without greeting. How much? Not the money. The message. He was at her apartment 23 minutes later, hair still wet from the shower, wearing yesterday's shirt. They sat on her floor surrounded by printouts and empty coffee cups and traced the breach back through 17 layers of obfuscation. It's him, she said finally. Has to be. From federal prison? Scott's voice was gentle, disbelieving. Julian once rerouted an entire oil tanker from a BlackBerry in a strip club. You think concrete walls stop him? Scott was quiet for a long time. What do you want to do? She looked at the orchid on her desk, still impossibly white, still alive despite her black thumb, and felt something inside her chest harden into diamond. I want to burn the phoenix before it learns to fly. They worked through the night fortifying every system, every back door, every dark corner Julian might have left for himself. By dawn the building was locked down tighter than Fort Knox. And still, at 9:42 a.m., the attack came. Not subtle this time. Every screen in the trading floor went black, then lit up with a single image, the Delarosa family crest, a phoenix wreathed in flames, dripping digital blood. Accounts began hemorrhaging money in real time. Hundreds of millions vanishing into the void like smoke. Emelia stood frozen in the middle of the chaos, watching the numbers bleed out, and felt Julian's smile on the back of her neck. The intercom crackled. A voice, distorted, mechanical, but unmistakably his, filled the entire floor. Hello, darling, it purred. Did you miss me? Scott grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the server room. This isn't over, he said. Emelia squeezed back so hard her knuckles went white. No, she whispered. It's just beginning. The server room was a tomb of humming steel and blue light. Scott slammed the door behind them, fingers flying over the emergency shutdown panel. Monitors flickered, then died. The phoenix on the screens faded like a dying ember. But the money was already gone. $287 million, vaporized in 8 minutes. Routed through a labyrinth of ghost accounts that looped back on themselves until they knotted into nothing. Emelia stood in the dark, heart hammering so hard she tasted copper. Julian's voice still echoed in her skull, that mechanical purr curling around her name like smoke. Scott's phone buzzed. Then hers. Then every phone in the building. The board was calling an emergency meeting. Now. They didn't make it to the conference room before the leak started. By the time they reached the 42nd floor, Bloomberg was running the headline, Delarosa 2.0? DV Holdings hemorrhaging in mystery breach. Someone had dumped internal memos, confidential ones, about a pending merger with Nexus Corporation. Stock in the target company plummeted 23% in after-hours trading. Their own shares opened down 18% the next morning. And it didn't stop. It got worse. Every week brought a new wound. A leveraged position in rare earth minerals suddenly shorted by a whale account no one could trace. A biotech partnership announcement leaked 48 hours early, letting competitors undercut them. A currency trade that should have netted $40 million instead reversed itself mid-execution, handing the profit to an anonymous counterparty. Millions bled out, steady and surgical. Emelia saw the pattern on the fourth attack. She was alone in the war room at 3:12 a.m., surrounded by whiteboards scrawled with arrows and code fragments, when it clicked. The trades weren't random. They followed her old algorithm, the one she'd built to catch fraud. Except now it was inverted. Weaponized. Every move she'd taught the system to flag as suspicious, it now used to create them. Julian hadn't just studied her code. He'd fucked it, twisted it, made it his. She called Scott from the floor, back against the glass wall, city lights bleeding across her face. It's me, she said when he answered. He's using my own system against us. Silence on the line. Then, I'm coming. He found her exactly where she said she'd be, curled into herself like a child hiding from monsters. He didn't ask if she was okay. He just sat beside her, shoulder to shoulder, and waited. He kept backups, she whispered. Of everything. My notes. My prototypes. The versions I deleted because they scared me, too aggressive, too aware. He kept them all. Scott's voice was gravel. We'll rebuild it. From scratch. We don't have time. The war room became their bunker. Days bled into nights. Analysts rotated in shifts. Emelia didn't leave. She showered in the executive gym, ate from vending machines, slept in 37-minute bursts on the leather sofa. Her eyes turned the color of old bruises. They tried everything. Firewalls rewritten in Rust. Quantum-resistant encryption. Air-gapped trading terminals. Behavioral anomaly detectors trained on Julian's own historical patterns. Every countermeasure failed within hours. The algorithm adapted faster than they could code. It learned. It anticipated. It laughed at them in cascading losses. The board meetings turned ugly. Scott aged 10 years and 2 months. The man who'd once stared down hostile takeovers now had tremors in his left hand when he thought no one was watching. You promised us she was the solution, one director snarled, jabbing a finger at Emelia across the mahogany table. Instead, she's the goddamn Trojan horse. Scott's reply was ice. She's the only reason we're still breathing. Touch her and I'll burn this company down myself. Afterward, in the elevator, he apologized. Don't, Emelia said. They're not wrong. She started seeing threats everywhere. The new barista who smiled too long. The janitor who lingered outside her office. The way the trader in the corner cubicle always seemed to be watching her reflection in his monitor. She stopped taking the subway. Started carrying a knife in her boot. Checked her locks 7 times before sleep that never came. Scott found her once at 5 a.m. on the roof, 42 stories up, staring down at the street like she was measuring the fall. He didn't speak. Just stood behind her, close enough that she could feel his warmth against the December wind. I used to think surviving him was the worst part, she said to the darkness. Turns out living with it might be worse. His hand settled on her shoulder, light as ash. Then we make sure he doesn't get to write the ending. That was the night she started digging for real. Not into the code, into the prison. She bribed a guard with cryptocurrency routed through 11 wallets. Got visitor logs. Commissary records. A grainy photo of Julian in the yard, thinner, harder, smiling at something off camera. Then the phone logs. Federal prisons don't allow cell phones. But Julian Delarosa had never met a rule he couldn't buy, intimidate, or seduce into submission. There were calls to a burner registered to a nail salon in Queens. Another to a law firm that didn't exist. A third to a number that rang once and disconnected, every Tuesday at 9:17 p.m. She cross-referenced the times with the attacks. Perfect correlation. The nail salon was owned by the cousin of Julian's former driver. The law firm's address was a UPS store. The burner that rang once? Traced to a CI who'd rolled over in Julian's original trial and then mysteriously made bail. Intermediaries. A network still loyal. Still paid. She took the evidence to Scott in a manila folder labeled simply, him. He read it without expression. When he looked up, his eyes were flat, deadly. We end this, he said. How? By giving him exactly what he wants. The plan was insane. Beautifully, perfectly insane. They would feign collapse. Let the losses mount. Let the board scream. Let the stock tank. Then, when Julian was drunk on the scent of victory, they would dangle the one thing he could never resist, vulnerability. Nexus Corp. The merger that had been gutted by the first leak. DV Holdings still held a 42% stake, enough to control the board, enough to gut the company for parts if they chose. They would announce a fire sale. Desperate. Sloppy. Exactly the kind of panicked move a dying empire makes when it's circling the drain. The trades would follow her old patterns precisely. The ones Julian had studied like scripture. The algorithm would see the bait and bite. And when it did, they'd be waiting. Emelia spent 3 days staging the collapse. She leaked rumors to friendly reporters. Had Scott scream at her in public, carefully orchestrated, witnessed by the right people. Let the traitors see her crying in the bathroom, salt water drops, perfectly timed. She moved money through the old channels. Left digital fingerprints like breadcrumbs. On the final night, she stood alone in her office, city glittering beyond the glass like broken promises. Scott came in without knocking, carrying 2 glasses of scotch. To bait, he said, handing her one. She clinked her glass against his. To monsters who think they've won. They drank in silence. At 11:47 p.m., the press release went live. DV Holdings announces emergency divestiture of Nexus Corp stake amid ongoing losses. The offering was obscene, 40% below market. A distress signal in neon. Emelia watched the wire confirmations upload, her reflection superimposed over the data streams like a ghost in the machine. Somewhere in a federal prison in upstate New York, Julian Delarosa was smiling. She smiled back at the screen. Come and get me, you bastard. The trap was set. The bait was live. And this time, the phoenix would burn. The war room had become a crypt. No one spoke above a whisper. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee, sweat, and ozone from too many screens. 42 inches of reinforced glass separated them from the trading floor below, but it might as well have been miles. Down there, the few remaining loyalists moved like ghosts, executing the fake orders Emelia fed them. Up here, the team waited. Scott stood behind her chair, hands braced on the backrest, knuckles white. 3 forensic accountants hunched over laptops. 2 cybersecurity specialists from a firm that charged more per hour than most people made in a week. And Emelia, center of the web, architect of the endgame. The bait was live for 14 hours. At hour 9, the first nibble came. A shell entity in Singapore initiated a short position on Nexus Corporation modest. Testing. Emelia let it win. She routed a cluster of sell orders through the old channels, sloppy and obvious, exactly how a panicked executive would behave. The shorts profited. 23 million. Pocket change. Julian tasted blood. By hour 12, the positions ballooned. Whales surfaced from the Caymans, from Liechtenstein, from a crypto exchange in Estonia that hadn't existed 6 months ago. They piled into puts, into leveraged shorts, into derivatives so toxic they made the '08 crisis look like a bake sale. All betting that Nexus would crater when DV dumped its stake at fire sale prices. The algorithm, her algorithm, twisted into something monstrous, was ravenous. Emelia watched the numbers climb and felt nothing. Not fear. Not even satisfaction. Just the cold, clean focus she used to get right before Julian would summon her to his office and close the door. Scott leaned down, breath warm against her ear. How big are you letting it get? All the way, she said. He needs to believe he's already won. At T-90 minutes to market close, the adverse position crossed 9 figures. Then 10. The room was silent except for the soft click of keys and the occasional sharp inhale. Emelia's hand hovered over the enter key that would release the press bulletin. The one they'd drafted weeks ago, hidden behind 7 layers of encryption, scheduled to hit every major wire service at exactly 3:47 p.m. Eastern. She watched the clock tick. 3 hours 46 minutes and 11 seconds. 3 hours 46 minutes and 27 seconds. 3 hours 46 minutes and 43 seconds. Julian's network was all in now. Every hidden account, every slush fund, every favor cashed in from prison. The algorithm had overcommitted exactly as she'd predicted, because she'd built it to be greedy when it smelled weakness. She'd built it in her own image, once upon a time. 3 hours 46 minutes and 59 seconds. Her finger came down. The bulletin fired. DV Holdings and Nexus Corp announced strategic alliance and full merger at premium valuation. The words blasted across Bloomberg, Reuters, CNBC, every terminal on the floor below. The trading pits in Chicago froze. Algorithms that weren't Julian screeched to a halt, recalculating. Nexus stock didn't just surge. It detonated. 40%. 60. 85. The shorts were obliterated in minutes. Margin calls cascaded like dominoes. Liquidation engines kicked in automatically, selling positions at any price to cover. Emelia watched the numbers flip from red to green so fast the screens blurred. Scott's hands came down on her shoulders, gripping hard enough to bruise. "It's over," he whispered. She couldn't speak. On the dark web monitoring feeds they'd hacked into, the ghost accounts began to zero out. One by one. Like lights going dark across a city during a blackout. 9 figures became 8. Became 6. Became nothing. The final tally came in just after the closing bell. Julian Delarosa, through his proxies, his loyalists, his empire of shadows, had lost everything. $1,437,000,000. Gone. The room erupted. Someone popped champagne that had been hidden in a drawer for exactly this moment. The cybersecurity guys high-fived like teenagers. One of the accountants started crying quietly into his sleeve. Scott pulled Emelia up from her chair and hugged her so hard her feet left the floor. "You brilliant, terrifying woman," he said into her hair. She laughed, actually laughed, until she couldn't breathe. The cleanup took weeks. FBI raids on the intermediaries. Seizure of assets worldwide. A federal judge who'd been quietly watching the entire operation unsealed indictments that sent 3 more of Julian's lieutenants to prison. Julian himself was moved to solitary after a shakedown found a contraband phone hidden in a hollowed-out Bible. The warden, newly appointed, incorruptible, personally oversaw the transfer. He would never touch a keyboard again. Emelia's exoneration was absolute. Every lawsuit she'd filed settled with public apologies and 8-figure payouts she donated anonymously to domestic violence shelters. The headlines finally said what she'd known all along. Emelia Cruz, the woman who ended Julian Delarosa. She kept one article framed in her office. Not for vanity. For proof. The board voted unanimously to make her co-CEO alongside Scott. She accepted on the condition that she never had to wear heels to work again. He laughed and said yes. One night in early spring, Scott found her on the rooftop. Not the DV Holdings roof this time. A different one. Higher. They'd flown to Los Angeles for the formal signing of the Nexus merger, Silicon and Steel meeting finance and fire. The ceremony had been held at the Nexus campus in El Segundo, all glass and optimism and people who still believed in the future. Now the city stretched below them like a circuit board, lights pulsing in waves all the way to the ocean. Scott handed her a glass of champagne. Real champagne. The good stuff. To the end, he said. She took it but didn't drink. "Do you think he knows?" she asked quietly. "That we took everything?" "That he lost." Scott leaned on the railing beside her. The wind tugged at his tie. "I hope so," he said. "I hope he wakes up every morning in that 6x8 box and remembers that the last thing he ever built was the weapon that destroyed him. And that a woman he tried to break was the one who pulled the trigger." Emelia looked out over Los Angeles, over the sprawl of it, the chaos ordered into grids of light, and felt something inside her settle. Not peace. Not yet. But close enough. "I used to think power was something men like him hoarded," she said. "Something they could take from you if you let them close enough. But it's not. Power is what's left when they've taken everything else. When you're still standing. Still fighting. Still you." She turned to Scott. "I'm not the 8 anymore. Or the whistleblower. Or the victim. I'm just me. And that's enough." He studied her face for a long moment, something soft and fierce in his eyes. "It's more than enough," he said. They stood in silence as the city breathed below them. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed and faded. Emelia raised her glass finally. To rising, she said. Scott clinked his against hers. To burning brighter. They drank. And for the first time in years, Emelia Cruz looked at the horizon and saw not what she'd escaped, but everything she was about to become.